Hello and welcome to the Design Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Chris Whyte, and in this podcast series, we explore the career journeys of design and engineering leaders from the world of physical product development. In today's episode, I'm joined by Tim Sharpe, co-founder of Better Normal, a consultancy focusing on helping non-designers adopt a designer's mindset, including understanding users, getting to the root of problems, and navigating organizational change. Before starting Better Normal, Tim was Innovation Director for Pentland Brands, and throughout his career, Tim has worked in Europe, the US, and Asia, both in-house and as a consultant. He's worked for startups, design consultancies, and established global brands. Some notable brands he's worked on or worked with over the years include Apple, Berghaus, Dell, Elekta, GSK, Hitachi Rail, HP, LG, Netgear, Omega, Samsung, Speedo, Takehua, and many more. There's quite a few there, Tim. As well as discussing his career to date, we're going to delve into how design can become a strategic advantage, even for non-design companies. So without further ado, Tim, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
So Tim, again, thanks for joining me. So obviously we've got a lot to go through, as the intro suggested, but I always like to start at the beginning. So perhaps you give us a little kind of insight into, and maybe share how you got started in product development, product design, why product design in the first place, and maybe share some kind of pivotal moments in your early career.
Yeah, certainly give it a go. So probably like many designers, didn't really know what design was when I was in school, certainly in high school. There's design and technology courses, but that's sort of more woodworking and metalwork, and I guess these days more 3D printing type projects. But didn't really know what design was. So I was very fortunate to have a very supportive art teacher who set me on a course to explore. I started my journey then really discovering what design was by doing a foundation course in Maidstone, and it was a brilliant course because dabbled in a bit of everything. We did a bit of photography, a bit of printing, a bit of fine art, and so forth. And it sort of helped me figure out what I didn't really want to do, and that's where I discovered product design. You know, I think it was sort of that architecture on a smaller scale. I loved the automotive industry and sort of car design, but I didn't really want to get stuck designing vehicles or wing mirrors. So the fact that there was this thing, product design, was quite a revelation. And from there, I went to design school that was based in Switzerland. It's an American college, though, called Art Center. At the time that I went there, they did have a campus in Switzerland, which is where I was born. So I went back to Switzerland, started product design as an education. And because it was an American college, I was fortunate enough that I could do effectively a year in California as well. And that, again, from a very early stage, I was very fortunate in that I was exposed to design education from a sort of European, very German, very French sort of sponsored projects, where a lot of the emphasis was on feasibility, a lot of it on cost and manufacturing constraints and so forth. And then this sort of dream big, anything goes, the American dream kind of side of things. And it was that combination that sort of set me up, if you like, really on the design career that I then had. So I started in London, was my first job. I then went back to Switzerland, again, drawing me back. And there I worked on a lot of watches. So that's where I worked with the likes of Omega and Tag Heuer and Swatch and Blancpain and lots of other high-end watches. And that's where I learned the value of brand and the differences that a brand needs to portray and convey through its products. So that was, again, a very lucky streak for me, in that I very quickly got hands-on with some top-end brands. I designed the re-edition of the Monaco watch, which is a square Tag Heuer watch. It's a classic now, and I did that within sort of 3 years of graduating from design university. Wow. So, I was very fortunate that I was given these opportunities. And then I decided that I didn't really want to be a watch designer, and that was sort of the niche that I'd fallen into. And as much as I enjoyed it, I wanted to explore other materials, other challenges, other briefs. And that's where we moved to San Francisco. And so there at the time, moved there just as the dot-com bubble was still expanding and then burst. And so a big period of change in San Francisco. And it's quite a tight-knit design community there. So lots of design consultancies, some big, powerful global brands are based in Silicon Valley as well. And it's just sort of a fantastic melting pot. You just get to know everybody. It's quite a very social sort of design scene as it is here in the UK. So I was, again, very fortunate being able to work with some fantastic clients, brilliant projects, got to meet some brilliant people. And that's where I really learnt the distinction, if you like, between a design brief from a brand such as Dell or HP, who see themselves challenged in some cases by the startups that just sort of, rise and fall countless times. And that's the sort of the norm, if you like, that, you have an idea, you have a passion, you see a problem that can be solved through the implementation of a solution, you give it a go. And I think that's a very American advantage, if you like, that this idea of giving it a go. And if you fail, you learn from the lessons, you pick yourself up and you go again. And that sort of mentality of some things will work, some things don't, but you give it a go. So yeah, I was fortunate that worked with some, like I say, some global brands. Also got to work with some startups, some of which went nowhere. So that in itself was a learning opportunity. And others went on to be very successful, bought out by big telecoms companies. A couple, became household names like Fitbit. So that was an incredible experience. But it was a long way from home, a long way from family. So I sort of had a look, okay, how do we, shuffle things up again? And so moved to the UK again, and in 2007, and I joined design consultancy, DCA, which was, brilliant at the time in that it had this well, it's still very successful. But, what was interesting at the time for me was that it had this breadth of sectors. So transportation, medical, a lot of FMCG projects, consumer in general, industrial. So it's, and it also has a lot of the skill sets in-house. So the user research, the engineering, the electronics, and so forth. So some fantastic projects working on there. And in part of the attraction there was really growing the design team and the skill sets and bringing over some of the lessons that I'd learned from San Francisco and sort of bringing it to a well-established consultancy such as DCA. So stayed there for a while, and then I got headhunted for a role at Speedo to head up the design and innovation team there, which was a bit of a surprise because I'd never designed any apparel. I'm not a swimmer. And yes, I had to double check that they had the right Tim Sharpe that they were looking for. But in fact, what they were looking for wasn't expertise in swimming or apparel, because they already had that in-house. Fantastic team, absolute, brilliant individuals working there. And they had those skill sets. So what they were looking for was somebody that could bring experience and ideas from other industries, other sectors, and bring that into the Speedo world, if you like. So that was another very fortunate, fantastic experience.
It's quite a journey so far then, isn't it? So,
I've been so lucky, really. Luck has definitely had a big role to play.
So you've gone from, if I get the tracking right then, so Switzerland to London to back to Switzerland. Oh, sorry, no. Switzerland to California. Is that right? And then back to Switzerland, and then London, and then back to California, and then the Midlands, and that's kind of where you've stayed since. Is that right?
Yeah, so been here since 2007. Yeah.
And how much of your kind of success? I know a modest man, we're always kind of growing, but like, how much of your journey and your success do you put down to that early decision to kind of explore international opportunities?
Oh, a huge amount. I mean, like say a lot of luck played into it in that these
Mm,
roles came about, but also the fact that I was able to seize those
mm,
opportunities. You know, I was very fortunate to be able to just say, yeah, let's go to California. You know, my wife is half American, so managed to get the green card, so that wasn't a
mm.
hurdle, which can be,
Yeah.
you know, a hurdle
Yeah.
for some. Um, so yeah, definitely lucky, but also I think just timings, you know, and
Hmm.
we're in another period now, another you know massive change with, um, you know, I mentioned the .com bubble when
Mm,
when I moved to San Francisco because the internet 2.0 was really taking shape. So it's
mm,
things that we just take for granted now that websites do what they do
hmm.
and apps are abundant and solve all these
Yeah.
problems. But you know, when we moved there, Google didn't exist. The iPhone hadn't come out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
These are big things that a lot of people just take for granted now. But it was a
Mm,
different era, without making myself sound too old. But I think we're in another era with what AI is able to
hmm.
offer and how we use AI as a tool. It was very similar to how do we use the internet as a tool for opportunities. So
Mm,
I was very fortunate to be able to places where this stuff was being created, you know, and I got to
mm,
work with amazing people on some fantastic projects that some of them became foundational. But also, you know, I remember a lot of the conversations for that we had with Dell, for example, was, you know, one of the briefs that they had was they wanted to have an iPod killer. This was before the iPhone, and the iPod was the most successful consumer product, and you know they wanted to do their own MP3 player, and it was
yeah.
basically an iPod killer project. And we basically looked at the project, looked at the brief, looked at what they were going to do in order to implement it, and we said,
Mm,
don't bother. You
yeah.
won't. This is what you are going to do in order to try and beat Apple. You won't beat Apple. You
Mm,
know, they'll have other strengths. Let Apple play to their strengths. You need to find a different way. And
mm,
that's really where I that started becoming the shift between focusing on products and the details, which I'm passionate about. I love
mm,
materials, I love textures, I love form. But you know, this really started becoming about strategic design decisions,
hmm.
and I sort of, you know, really got exposed to that in San Francisco, if you like.
Wow. And that initial kind of move, obviously you did the placement year, didn't you, over in California as part of your degree? But and I guess you had the advantage of already being exposed to the international kind of world, if you like, being kind of born in Switzerland. And then, did you grow up in the UK or did you grow up in Switzerland then?
No, I grew up in Geneva, in
Yeah.
Switzerland. Went to an international school, so you know
Okay.
the international background was just normal for me. I didn't
Yeah.
realize it was exceptional at the time, but again, it was yeah, very fortunate. I also did
Mm.
when I was studying, I managed to do a 6-month placement in Hong Kong.
Oh wow.
That
Okay.
again sort of exposed me to a completely different culture.
Mm.
You know, again, remember this is before the internet, so couldn't just go online and have a look at what you know what Hong Kong was like. So I purposely went there without doing too much research.
Hmm.
Initially, I knew I wanted to go to Asia, so Tokyo or Hong Kong, and I got the internship in Hong Kong, and I was just exposed to a complete culture shock
Wow. Yeah.
in a good way. You know,
Yeah.
it was really quite enlightening to
Mm.
experience things anew and be a minority as well. You know, I
Hmm.
think that's something that you know, being a white middle aged male now,
Mm.
you know, I think having experienced just a glimpse of what it's like to be a minority
Mm.
has given me a lot of empathy towards people that aren't white middle-aged men.
Oh
You
wow.
know,
Yeah.
that as well, I think, is something that was very fortunate.
Mm. Oh, that's fascinating. So yeah, it's often kind of is one of the challenges with kind of young designers or aspiring designers is how do we stand out? And you kind of you yourself were predisposed to that kind of that travel lifestyle, kind of being able to just go wherever kind of you needed to. And I think maybe it's a British thing, I don't know, but we seem kind of rooted to where we grow up or where we go to university. You tend to see a lot of people stick around those areas, whereas our European friends and certainly the friends over in the States, they tend to move around a lot more freely. I speak to designers and engineers on the West Coast, and they're quite happy to just relocate the other side, for the right opportunity. Whereas here it's like pulling teeth trying to get someone to move in the UK, even if it's just another county. It's crazy, but wonderful. That kind of brings us kind of up to date, doesn't it? So that's so why don't you tell us a little bit about kind of what you're doing now then with your current business, and kind of how your experience to date has kind of shaped that, and what your objectives are, really, what you're trying to achieve with Better Normal.
Yeah. So, well, Better Normal was sort of set up when I left Pentland Brands, who are the parent company to Speedo, and they own a couple of others, including Berghaus and Endura. Yeah. And the reason I set Better Normal up was that it was sort of to tap into the mindsets and the way that designers think is incredibly valuable. And when you're surrounded by other designers, whether it be on a university course or even in design consultancies or what have you, you get surrounded by like-minded people. You think that this is normal, that this is how people solve problems, but it's not. And I really learned that. Obviously, I had exposure to that when I was working in consultancy, working with many different clients. But working in-house, got to see that most of the business is organized around other skill sets that designers need to understand, the financials, some of the marketing skill sets, logistics from a supply chain point of view. All of these things maybe don't come naturally to many designers, but they are critical. Legal, what you can and can't do for what reasons. But the design skill set is quite rare in terms of the value that it can bring. And it's often overlooked, or at least not given the same seat at the table as some of these other functions are. And that's what I really learned at Pentland, that design and the mindsets that designers have in terms of how they break down problems, how they try and dissect complex problems into smaller chunks that you can address. This notion of creating lots of concepts, eliminating 99% of them to stay on the one that you get 1% you're going to move forward, and then still refine it. That's normal for designers, but it's not a typical strength that many other business functions have, where you just define a direction that you're going to go in, you create a case for the budget, you get given a budget, you've got to protect that budget, you've got to deliver against that budget. Everything gets defined and is quite linear, even in an agile world, which many businesses try to adopt. This sense of needing to deliver something that you promised you would deliver a year or 5 years before is still very much a business mindset. So what I did is I took this designer's mindset idea and set up Better Normal to help other organizations that don't necessarily have design even in their vocabulary. So some of the clients that I've worked with, the WHO, for example, World Health Organization, been working with them for a few years now, and obviously, organization with brilliant minds, incredibly smart people, incredibly worthwhile mission that they're on as well. But just help them to break down some of the challenges that they were facing into more manageable chunks, or to get them to pause and reflect and reframe the problem that they were really trying to solve. Get to the root of the problem they were trying to solve, rather than this big complex issue that they were trying to tackle all at once. Or a Cambridge City Council, working with councils, they are, again, it's like a ball of string that's been tied into a knot, and you pull on one bit and the whole knot gets tighter. So, how do you untangle that? It's just giving them different tools, different models that designers are comfortable with, and just say, why don't you try some of this as an approach to see if this may help untangle that knot a little bit. So that's kind of what I'm focusing on now. A little bit. Amazing, I have a couple of product clients where it's about a product, but in a lot of cases it's about services, or it's about structural organization.
So you're sorting out the World Health Organization. You're sorting out local council. You're going to fix the NHS.
I'd love to. I mean, when you say sort out, I have not sorted out on that scale. But it's yeah. I mean, the NHS is a prime example where it's such a worthwhile cause, and a lot of the challenges that they face are organizational challenges. And actually, if you could get in front of the right person, there is a conversation that I'm having that may lead to working with a small part of the NHS. It's recognizing that the small little bits that you can do, and if that little bit works, then maybe you've got a foothold in the next bit. And so much of this is just not biting off too much and just recognizing that small wins, small gains are incredibly valuable, even if you haven't solved the whole lot.
Well, yeah, because if that then leads on to other departments taking notice, or even individuals, and that informing decisions that they take, you never know when that one little change that you make, how far that might spread in terms of positive impact. It's really interesting that those organisations that you've mentioned there, especially councils, and I imagine a big international organisation like like WHO, quite imagine, and you can correct me on this, but I imagine quite difficult or not necessarily open to change, or certainly from an outside perspective. So how do you talk me through kind of the process then for like winning an account like that, and kind of and getting them on board with kind of how you can add value and deliver change, basically?
Yeah, I mean, with the WHO, again, I've been so fortunate that I've met people that I managed to have the right conversations with, and they were working on this project and asked for some help, and I was able to offer that help and be part of the team that delivered a program of work. But the other really critical aspect to that project being successful was that the WHO themselves, the leadership there recognized that it's an incredibly complex organization, but it's also an organization that's been run a certain way for a long time, and that's needing to change because, rather than be very hierarchical, that decisions get made at the top and filtered down for a task force to deliver a mandate. It's very much about, well, hold on a second, we're not on the front line, or we don't have personal experience of this particular challenge. Can you please inform us what this challenge is, and can you then help be part of the problem to form a solution to it? So that recognition that, the endorsement that innovation and the innovation mindset can be useful for the WHO came from within the WHO. So they were already on board to say, we're going to listen to you. It's incredibly difficult to convince somebody who's not recognized that need, because it's something that can just get pushed down the line. So, that's the first instance. But to begin with, we started, it was a very structured program that was in place, where it's basically an open innovation sort of program where people within the organization were identifying challenges that they thought were worth solving. And then we helped them formulate what that challenge was, why it was worth solving, and how it could be solved, and whether it should be solved in a certain way or whether there are other solutions, and getting them to not necessarily focus on the solution, but really reframe the problem. When you do that, you can also get other people to buy in, because the problem becomes a shared problem, whereas a solution is often a small, narrow group of people that can implement a solution. So getting them to recognize that there was value in reframing problems, experimenting, exploring, and then articulating how their value proposition, how their solution or series of solutions was going to add value, was not something that they were used to doing. So it was really using their expertise of the subject matters, but getting them to reframe how they discussed it in a way that could be more collaborative, and non-experts understanding what the challenges were. So that was it was a brilliant project. Continue working with them in some different project areas. But a lot of that is their openness and willingness to listen to somebody who's not in the organization, saying, well, how about this? What about that? Or probing. I think one of the roles that as designers in general as well should try and adopt, regardless of who they're working with, is not be afraid of asking the silly questions. And I think that's something that as designers we may again take as a natural curiosity. You have to be curious as a designer. You have to explore options and different solutions and so forth. But just not knowing what the answer is a really valuable trait. So that's something that I think, asking the silly questions at the WHO is it's difficult if you're within the organization. Sometimes it's very difficult to raise your hand and say, hold on a second, I don't understand that. Whereas
and I guess there's a hesitancy, isn't there, to ask questions sometimes if they appear tricky or daft or whatever, but it does get you to that root cause a lot quicker. And I know from my experience, and I speak to a lot of design consultancy leaders, that like if you go in and you try and just pitch a product or a solution without really understanding kind of what the problem is, then you're doomed to fail. It's a bit of a lottery whether that product actually fits that need. But if you can uncover and discover the problems that you're facing, and by asking those questions, then you're much likely to get that collaboration as well, because that person that you're speaking to feels like they're part of that discussion, that journey, and they're going to be more likely to buy into the solution that you propose.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's really interesting.
And asking the end users, the audience, the target audience, or your users, your customers, whichever sector you're in, they may be called differently, but people that are basically going to benefit from whatever solution you implement, getting them involved. It's not asking them and then just doing what they say, that's not involving them. But it is, you do need to understand what problem they face in order to be able to deliver a solution that's going to be valuable. And I think this is where design as a methodology, can really help, because you can probe, you can prototype, you can test the prototype and learn lessons from that, and then you can adapt it. If you're so fixated on your solution and just trying to force it through, but chances are you're going to miss the mark, and if you miss the mark too many times, then those are your opportunities gone. So
Absolutely.
Staying curious and asking questions is I think you've got a lot more chance of gaining from that. Because even if your solution doesn't work, at least you've learned something.
Yeah. So I've gleaned a few kind of potential tips then for the audience if you're looking to progress, just from the conversation we've had so far. So I'll start with number one is try and be born abroad. Number one, that's going to get you further ahead in your career. If you can't do that, then marry an American or a half American. But no, it's great. Just be curious. I think that's the main thing there. I think that stands people of all persuasions and all kind of industries and skill sets really well. And I've found, just ask the question, because worst case scenario, you feel stupid for a moment, but it's better than being stupid for a lifetime by not asking.
Exactly.
I probably butchered that. Someone's going to be writing with the correct kind of quote there, but wonderful. So you strike me as someone that likes to network, because you meet a lot of people, and a lot of the opportunities that I said this was going to happen. I don't know if you heard that, but that is someone at the door. So if you hold that thought.
No worries.
Are you frustrated by drawn-out recruitment processes, missing out on talent to your competition, or wasting time interviewing candidates who don't quite live up to their profile? Well, if you're the founder or leader of a physical technology brand or design consultancy, here's what we can do for you. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Chris Whyte, host of this podcast and the founder of Kodu, a specialist recruitment consultancy focused exclusively on physical product development. By working closely with you and your team, Kodu will help you improve your entire experience of hiring. We'll make it easier to identify, attract, and ultimately hire the very best design and engineering talents ahead of or from your competition. You'll only interview candidates who fit the brief, and we'll work with you to ensure you get the outcome you want, and fast, typically in 6 weeks or less. We have a 100% fill rate, and we guarantee to get you a positive outcome. Simply put, if we don't deliver, you don't pay. But how can I make such a claim? Well, the short answer is I've been doing this for a very long time. Kodu is built from over a decade of my own personal experience hiring hundreds of designers, engineers, managers and leaders, over 95% of whom are still in post 12 months later. I've personally built an incredible network of thousands of professionals in the physical product design and engineering space covering the UK, US and Europe. And I've taken what I've learned over the years and put the best of that into Kodu. So if you'd like to spend less time stuck in a recruitment loop and more time doing what you love, get in touch. Email me, chris@teamkodu.com, or message me on LinkedIn. But that's enough from me. Let's get back to the show. It was good that it happened like a natural segue as well. But so a lot of the opportunities you've been presented with throughout your career, but it sounds like have come through people that you've known, people that you've met, maybe on networking. But is there a strategy around that, or is there, how do those come about?
Yeah, I'd like to say there is a strategy, because then you can package up and sell on. But no, I think it goes very much along the same lines of stay curious. That don't just go to design gatherings. Do that as well, because you do network that way. But go to other conferences or workshops or anything else. And then when you're there, even if you're an introvert, I don't know if I'm an extrovert or an introvert, probably a bit of both, but it's small talk can be very awkward, I think we've all done that. And you do meet people that are just brilliant at it as well, and then you think, oh God, how can I fit in here? Just go along. I think the key to this is, even if you have an agenda at these things, don't go in trying to sell your agenda.
Mm-hmm.
Go in and ask other people what they're doing, what are they working on, how did they get there, you just ask questions, and then people open up, and then you can find a common thing that you may be able to go, oh, well, actually, I know someone who could, or actually, I've worked on something like that. Let's connect later. Or, But if you go in trying to sell something at these places, it again, some people are brilliant salesmen. I'm not. But if you go in being curious and you ask questions, that's brilliant. The other thing is, if you're sort of getting a list of tips together, is in the similar vein is as this curious is have really broad interests. So I'm a member of a book club here. We're a male book club in the village. It started basically because our wives were in a book club. So then we thought, oh, hang on, they're all getting together once a month. Why don't we get together? But in this book club, we've got, there's a banker, an ex-policeman, an electrician, a professor. We come from such different backgrounds and operating different things, but the conversations are always interesting because we're not all designers, or we're not all bankers, or we're not, and it's that variety and diversity that is so crucial to working with other people. But to your question originally, there is, then you get a network. You get a network going because you haven't just focused in on, I like, transportation designers. So I'm gonna get the car magazines and I'm gonna go to the car show. If that's all you do, you may meet the right people, but you're going to limit your connections because you're not speaking to somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, and that comes about by being curious and just giving it a go. So yes, there's the sense of being willing to move. That there's incredible opportunities within the UK. There's fantastic conferences across the UK. Just go to some. If your partner's in a completely different sector than you, maybe go along to a conference that they go to. So it just, I've been to insurance conventions. I mean,
that's a hard sell.
But you meet some amazing people because yes, the insurance industry may be not for everyone, but they're still populated with people, and they're interesting, and they have stories, and they know someone who's working in, I don't know, the tech industry, and then you go, oh, okay, well, there's a network through a network. So you do need to put yourself into some awkward situations or uncomfortable situations in order to come out the other end stronger for it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was at Eurobike in Frankfurt a few weeks ago, and I booked onto a networking event. I don't know if you ever go to any networking events after the conferences, but this one I paid like €200 to go to. And I think the normal ticket was like €80, and then it was like an add-on to this exclusive networking thing on Thursday. And I was thinking about not going because I was having such a great time at the expo, and it's so huge. But I thought, you know what, put myself out there, I'll go to it. And it's such a mix. Like there's probably only maybe 10-15% of the people that were there would potentially be clients or candidates for me, really. But the people that were there were investment bankers, there were educators, there was local government, there was one of the biggest venture capitalist investors in the bike scene was there. I'd been on a helicopter ride with Mike Ashley a few weeks before. I never would have been in that opportunity to kind of talk to those people, get interested, and meet them and find out what they do. And there's stuff there that I'll be able to introduce some of them to some of my contacts, because there's a mountain bike vibration expert kind of from the University of Edinburgh that was there. I was like, you never know, that you just got to put yourself out there.
Yeah.
And so just be curious.
The great thing with that is that it is a networking event. So the reason that they're there is also to network, so again, you've got that receptive audience, if you like. Whereas if you're going to, definitely go to the trade shows and things like, an outdoors show or trade show. When I was at Pentland, we would go to, because Berghaus is an outdoors brand, we would go to lots of expos that weren't necessarily in Berghaus's niche, but they're linked to the outdoors or mountains or adventure or whatever. And you meet all sorts of other people there. But if you go to the networking aspects, they're receptive, and often you've got a little canapé and a little drink, and things are a lot more relaxed, less formal. Really helps to just get a conversation going. So.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's great at the trade shows going out and seeing kind of the brands, and obviously I went to the bike one, so it's great seeing all the people whiz around on the test track on the bikes. But it does feel awkward going up to the stand, especially if they're busy and they're talking to potential customers or suppliers. It can feel a little bit forced. Whereas a networking event, like you say, everyone's there to meet new people and network. So even if you're not the best at small talk, and I don't particularly enjoy forced small talk, it doesn't take long to get the conversation going. It's like, oh, what brings you here? Or kind of, exactly. Hi, I'm Chris. It's something as simple as that. Wonderful. So perhaps you could talk us through kind of some of the career highlights, or maybe kind of some of the challenges that you've overcome throughout your career that you're particularly proud of, that you might be able to pull some useful insights for the audience.
Yeah, so one of the projects that I'm still really proud of, and was privileged to be part of that team, was for Electa, which was the development of a new machine piece of equipment to treat cancer. So again, something that I felt was incredibly worthwhile. And any improvement that we could be involved with was time well spent. So that in itself was brilliant. But one of the things that made that project so special was that it did pull together a really diverse team with skill sets that were as diverse as the people and the individuals themselves. So we had brilliant user researchers. I mean, the user research phase of that project was months and months. It wasn't something that we just did in a couple of weeks or was simply desk based. The team went around globally to gather the insights that were going to form the basis for any design direction that we're going to do. Then we had brilliant engineers. We had electronics. We were obviously working with an incredibly passionate client as well, who had this in-house knowledge, and it was something that was new in the industry, in the sector. We were pushing the envelope together, and so again that generated a lot of passion for the project. But it was a brilliant team effort, and just being part of that team, even though you could say, well, the design was a small part to it, because ultimately it's about the science, it's the physics of being able to get this thing to work had nothing to do with us as a design team. Yet we made it not only more approachable for the patients less daunting, less scary, but we made it more efficient because we understood where the challenges lay for the clinicians and the operators and the technicians who were needing the maintenance. We understood what the problems were, so we were able to improve their experience and make the process a lot more efficient, simpler to understand, easier to maintain. All of those things add up to this equipment being used more hours than it wasn't. So, that led to more patients going through. So that led to more people getting the treatment that they needed. So design had a massive impact on that project. So the teamwork was brilliant. Every day was a lesson. And I think one of the mantras that I've had in my career is I enjoy working at a place for a brand with people if I'm valued and I can add value. And that project definitely did that. I felt like I was adding value with my skill set and expertise. It was being valued, but I also was gaining value from other people and their expertise. So that was a brilliant example of if you like, of a project that as a designer we should really try and do more of. Some of the challenges, I've definitely worked on some projects that I really didn't think the world needed. And I think as a designer, when you're starting off in your career, you may either not be aware of that. You might just be excited by the opportunity of designing an object, or it's out of your control and it's your job. You just have to get on and do it. But I think as you progress in your career, if you can start making choices where you work on projects that you feel are worth having in this world, that makes not only your work more valuable, but it makes the world a better place. I think that is a good objective to have. And some of the projects that I've worked on, I sort of feel like the world could have done without. But that you take those and you move on. You learn the lessons from them and you move on. One project that I did work on, which I think is a valuable lesson, is all about timing. And this was when I was in the US in San Francisco. We worked on a project which ultimately ended up being a smartphone on a desk, on a home desk phone, if you like. So it was just before the iPhone came out, and so all of the needs that had been identified, that people wanted to check the traffic so that they could plan their commute, or look at the weather quickly, or see what was going to be on TV later that evening, or look at their calendar. All of those needs were identified, but it was implemented into a home smart hub, if you like, that you would have, I don't know, on the kitchen counter or some in the hallway somewhere, that the family would convene around and get the information. Obviously, that wasn't how
like a future wireless
to get that information. And timing was so important, because although all the insights were there, it wasn't in a home desk hub that people wanted it. It was obviously in a smartphone, and then the iPhone came out, and the rest is history. So timing is really key as well. And as a designer, if you can look at the insights and actually just sort of say, well, push back on the client and say, well, is this solution really what we need to be doing given the insight? Have that confidence to look at the data and ask questions and challenge and push back. Don't just take the client's brief as gospel. It's the real value is to question it.
So how
obviously don't be a pest, you got to work with them. They're well intentioned for the most part, so work with them. Just challenge in a constructive manner.
Absolutely. It's such a difficult one, especially if you're working in a consultancy and the client's paying the bill. Kind of there's a fine line between kind of consulting and pushing the client away, kind of or just doing what you're paid to do. But interesting, the kind of the home hub, then that was just before the iPhone came out. Was it known internally that Apple were developing essentially a product killer?
No. I mean, when the iPhone came out, it really was revolutionary. If prior to the iPhone, Apple had done a partnership with Motorola, and they had a phone that had some sort of Apple app input on them, but it was so clunky. It was a horrible solution. So the sense that something like this could be in your pocket was
Yeah.
There was the Palm Trio, BlackBerry, and so on, but they were so focused on business and emails and the security aspects. The fact that these things were
encrypted.
fantastic for business operations was where it all was. And then suddenly you had this consumer product that had, we now think of as normal, but it really wasn't. So it completely blindsided. And I think the other thing is that, you got to look at some of these things in hindsight and go, oh, well, it was obvious, but at the time it wasn't. Why would Apple kill its most successful product ever, which was the iPod? The iPhone did that. I mean, what company does that? So it was by no means something that you could foresee. Obviously, when it came out, it was then like a
and then the industry just changed almost overnight, didn't it? It was, but fascinating. Well, look, we're approaching time, so we'll kind of crack on with some quick fire questions, I guess. But we always ask my guests what kind of books or podcasts that you're into at the moment. So, is there any you can share?
Yeah, a couple of books. I've actually got one here on the desk. So this one here, Loon Shots. It's a brilliant book in that it's really about those crazy ideas that were dismissed. He gives some brilliant examples from the military, things like radar. Also in terms of medical, so some of the treatments for treating some diseases, when they were first proposed were ridiculed and not pushed forward. And the only reason they saw the light of day is that you have these small teams or an individual working with a team to keep going, to keep plowing on to find the answer. So Loon Shots, obviously a play on word on moonshots, which is, dream big, but Loon Shots is because not only are you dreaming big, but it's a crazy idea. So really, that book's brilliant. Another one called Ruined by Design, which is really interesting. It was actually written by someone who's a designer in San Francisco. And although it's really more based on sort of digital products, so UX, UI designers may be more interested in it. I think it's applicable to any design in that the Ruined by Design is basically giving some examples where as a designer, you have a responsibility. And if you design something that will harm someone else, or you design something that will ultimately leave the world in a worse place, it's up to you as a designer to make the choice of whether you do that. So that's quite an interesting one because it gives some really good examples. And again, back to sort of what we were talking about before, challenge the client, push back if you can. It's not easy and you can't always do it. But both of those books have some really broad examples in there that I find very interesting.
Well, there's a balance, isn't there?
Sorry.
So I was just going to say that, I mean, on that, in terms of the ideology and the principle around kind of designing meaningful stuff and stuff that's going to have a positive impact, there's a responsibility on business to do that. But I guess as a young designer that's kind of early on in your career, I'd say, I know maybe you agree with this or disagree, but hold those principles, but ultimately it's a stepping towards those. If you've got to design the thing to get you onto the mission, then unfortunately that's a choice you probably have to make a couple of times early in your career. But like I say, have that view, have that mission in mind, so that as you gain more experience and skills, you can then you'll have more choices, and you can say no to more stuff.
Yeah, and I think being involved in the conversation means you can influence it a lot more than if you're not involved in it. So take any of the opportunities you can, explore them, and then see what you can do to contribute to moving the needle in the direction that you feel is where you want to see that needle move.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sorry, you were saying about podcasts.
Yeah, sorry, podcast. I mean, obviously you've got your series, which I think is fantastic in terms of, but it is catering to in large part to those that are starting out in the industry or shifting skill set, and I think it's really useful resource to listen to all sorts. Hopefully people have listened to this one, get something different out of it to some of your other guests. And I think that's the benefit of having a series, is that you get different things out of listening to a
Yeah.
series. Another one that I think is absolutely brilliant is Revisionist History by Malcolm Gladwell. He's written a number of books which have been brilliant, Blink or Tipping Point. But again, he takes these examples that happen in so many different aspects, whether it be sports or education or Cold War spying or whatever the farming industry in the US compared to Indonesia. It's so broad as a topic, but he always has some really interesting insights and characters that he interviews. So that's another great podcast.
Brilliant. Thank you for the tips. I'll make sure they end up in the show notes. So and then final question. We're obviously recording this now. Last week there was news coming out of Dyson of thousands or so layoffs, like 30% of the business in the UK. Hundreds of designers and engineers going to be out of work soon. You've interviewed and kind of hired many designers over your time, and probably seen hundreds, if not thousands, of CVs and portfolios. I'll ask it in two parts. So, firstly, can you name one or two things that absolutely put you off when you kind of things that traps that candidates fall into in terms of on their CV that puts you off?
Yeah, when you're writing your CV or your portfolio, less is more, in the sense of don't try and cram everything in, because it's meant to be a foot in the door to have the interview. So be really selective. Your portfolio will only be as good as your weakest aspect, your project, and that goes all the way down to font and layout. I've had some portfolios that they've probably used about 15 different fonts in it, and you're just thinking, I can't take whatever you're saying seriously if this is what you're doing. The other one would be try and avoid the sort of the cliche. The number of CVs that start off with I am a young and passionate designer hopefully you are, but it doesn't need to be stated. Instead, give an example. And I think that can come through either a project that you've worked on or any other interest and passion that you have. One of the interviews that I still remember, and it was actually, he was a designer who came to work at DCA, but he then went off and sort of went back to his passion, which was polo, the sport. Yeah. So horse riding and polo gear and things. And that passion came through in his interview and in his work and so on. And so, if you find something that you are passionate about and you can give that as an example, that'll stand out and be a lot more memorable. It may mean you might not be of interest to 50% of the people you send your CV off to. But if you're that much more interesting to the other 50% or even 25%, that helps you stand out, then that's worth doing.
Massively, yeah. And I think you've already answered the other side, because I don't want it just to be focusing on the negative things. But what are the best things that you've seen on CVs and portfolios that have really caught your imagination?
So I think as designers, we do have the advantage that not only are we applying for a job most of the times with a CV, but we've got the opportunity to include a portfolio or some examples of work. And there are very few other examples that you can do that. If you're applying for a finance job, you don't send off, and here's some reports that I've done in my previous. Yeah. So it's a fantastic opportunity to highlight and literally showcase what you're capable of doing. So one of the things that I still think is crucial is the ability to show your problem-solving skills through sketches. And we've got incredible CAD packages now, and computing power is phenomenal. And too many young designers get hooked on, I need to do the glossy rendering. But they're a dime a dozen now. So I think if you can show a thought process through some really clear exploration sketches, that will really stand out, because it's like, I can hire this person to work through problems, not just produce glossy solutions. And that's what design is really about. It's working through problems. It's not just the presentation of the end result. So that would be my number one tip. Show your thought process, not just the end results.
Yeah, and that gets that's reiterated in almost every conversation I have about portfolios. It's show you're working, show how we got there. The render is nice, but we don't care about that. We care how you got there. And how important is the quality of the sketch? Because some designers will say to me, well, actually, I'm not great at sketching, but I can communicate my idea. Does it really matter?
Depends what kind of role you're going for. If you're looking for a design engineer role, then the quality of the sketch needs to be good enough to convey the idea and the functioning of your solution. If you've got a circular part in your design, it needs to look like a circle in perspective, not a cat's eye, which I've seen ellipses drawn that way. So it's like, is that meant to be round? Is that not round?
Yeah.
If it's difficult to read the sketch, that can be a bit of a challenge to overcome. In that case, I would recommend practice sketching, and just try and redraw it. Get some examples, get some books, look online. Just practice sketching. Redo your sketches if you need to in order to convey your ideas better. If you are looking for a design role where it's the engineering, the functionality is important, it should be in any design. But if it's more to do with proportion and mastery of form and surface control and detail proportions and so forth, then I think your sketching needs to probably be at a high enough level that you can convey variations in a design quickly. You shouldn't have to jump onto CAD in order to show the variations. You can use CAD as an underlay and then do some sketches over it. That's, I don't think, why wouldn't you? I mean, if you can block up something quickly in CAD, you've now got your proportions correct. But I do think you need to be able to work through ideas in a way that can be clearly understood by whomever you're sharing that sketch with.
Yeah.
I don't think you need to be necessarily a artistic, sometimes you get the car renderings always used to be the benchmark, that just look phenomenal. It doesn't have to be that level. I would say sketches, not renderings, are more important. Convey your ideas.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's great insight. So, well, we'll wrap up now. So in terms of how people can get in touch with you then, Tim, I think we spoke on LinkedIn to start with, but is there a preferred channel for people to find out more about the Better Normal?
Yeah, I mean, Better Normal's on LinkedIn as well. The website for Better Normal's betternormal.com. You can get in touch that way through email. That way. Otherwise, LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. I should know what my LinkedIn profile is.
I'll include it in the show notes. So
brilliant.
And I'll tag you on the post as well when we go live.
Brilliant.
So people can find you.
Yeah, conversations through LinkedIn is very easy because you just get messages, and then if there's a mutual interest to connect, I'm happy to connect. I don't tend to just connect to everybody that asks, just because. Why do you want to connect? I'm not interested in just accumulating the number of connections.
Yeah.
But if it's about a conversation, if I can be of help, happy to help. If it's an interesting problem that they want to discuss, happy to discuss.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing, and thank you again for taking part in the podcast.
Great. Well, thank you. It's been great talking, and look forward to the next podcasts that I can listen to as well.
Thank you for listening. I hope you really enjoyed this episode, and if you did, please like and subscribe and tell all of your friends. In the meantime, just a quick note from me. In addition to hosting this podcast, I'm also the founder of Kodu, a specialist recruitment business focused exclusively on physical product development. For a little over a decade now, I've worked exclusively within physical product design and engineering, helping startups and established brands hire mechanical design and development talent from mid-weight up to C-suite. I've worked in consumer electronics, e-bikes, femtech, medical devices, design consultancy, basically user-focused stuff. And it's the wonderful people I've met over the years that have inspired me to create this podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Kodu and how we work, please head over to teamkodu.com or message me, Chris Whyte, on LinkedIn. Thanks again for listening.